candidates from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to dive into, just the whole circus of politics right now, which we'll be diving in Ron Paul Liberty Report, Mythbusters. But we have one here that's from libertyviral.com. Gary Johnson will not be included in presidential debates. It has been announced by the Commission on Presidential Debates that Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and their running mates are the only candidates who will participate in the first debates, excluding the Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. The commission required that candidates register an average of 15% support in 5 recent polls selected by the CPD, and neither candidate achieved these thresholds. And then they have the press release there. So, again, that was libertyviral.com, and you can get the press release. And this is just, it's real typical of the two parties getting all the attention. And people go, well, they need to get that percent, that magical number in the polls, that 3 polls that group chooses, which can easily be deliberate on who they pick, people that will poll with others that may favor their views. But it's one of those things, too, as long as they keep pushing these people behind the curtain, they're not going to reach a extremely high number. Rarely can they. They would have to be just someone that blows people out of the water on all sides of the aisle, and the people that don't want to be a part of the aisle. It's very difficult, and it'll continue to be that way as long as they don't allow other people in these debates. And I think there's even a lot of people out there that forget about the Green Party, the Constitution Party. It becomes pretty, how should I say this? controlled and directed. And I think it really shows. Definitely the people that just, jump on these bandwagons and they really just don't want to look at the possibility that they're just buying into propaganda, that they're living in a fallacy, that they have a cognitive dissonance. It's very reflective of where we are in society, because you've seen the videos where people ask serious questions and these people on the street just they're oblivious, but then they ask them pop culture questions and they're almost a good 90% right. So let's get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. Mythbusters, politics is deplorable.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today's the day we do Mythbusters, and the co-host is Chris Rossini. He is also the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Good. What kind of stories are we going to tell today and dispel a myth here or there? What do you have?
Yes, we're going to cover a little bit of democracy today. There was some big news this week that Hillary Clinton branded millions of voters, or half of Trump supporters, in her words, as irredeemable and a basket of deplorables. Now, this is quite ironic because Hillary is running to be their president, is trying to get their votes as well. And it's also ironic that the U.S. government tries to militarily force this system of ours, which is turned into a circus, onto other nations. Now, is it any wonder that just maybe there are other nations out there that don't want this imposed on them, Dr. Paul?
I would think that we could find a few of those, but I just wonder what percentage of those people that support Hillary might fall into that category as well. There might be a few over there. But the whole idea, I think what we're talking about here is how the campaign has deteriorated. But if you look at what she's saying and saying that these are ugly people, terrible people, and they do these things and they believe bad things, the only real measurement for us should be who's initiating the violence and the aggression and starting the fight. And that's a different story. There was one episode, and obviously it was probably a Trump rally, where two supporters, or a supporter and a non-supporter, got into a scuffle. And I think the Trump supporter socked a guy. And this was a big deal because it looks like, the Trump supporters are really, really bad people. And they yelled and screamed about how horrible this guy was. And of course, if I'm accurate in what I'm describing, obviously he's wrong. I mean, they shouldn't be punching each other. And that was an act of aggression. But I wonder why they're never concerned. You mentioned about some of the things that we force ourselves around the world. But what about how the liberals and many conservatives think nothing of using force, physical force, but it's in a more subtle way because it's legal. It's the IRS that comes, or some bureaucrat, or somebody that's enforcing some regulation, a bank regulation, or arresting you for laundering money and all these things. That's our might, and they come in, and if it's used for the transfer of wealth, especially, that we would never tolerate it if we allowed somebody to come into our house and take their fair share. No, they're not allowed to do that, but they're allowed to send the government. And if we use the same principle that they deplore, that these are terrible people, and they're forcing people to do certain things, I mean, that's the nature of our business. I mean, we're We're remaking the Middle East. We run an empire. We're involved in nation building. And the more I read about and try to understand how the CIA is operating, not only internationally but domestically, that is even a force that's being used to change the system outside the political system. People don't even talk about it, more so now than they used to, because, a lot of people now think about the CIA and how they most likely were involved in the Kennedy assassination and various other scandals that we've had in this country. So it is, something that is very important to talk about, but it's the philosophy of it that makes people deplorable. If you have a philosophy that it's legitimate to use government force to do bad things and think nothing of it and try to say, well, those people are bad because there was a scuffle. Well, there shouldn't be a scuffle, but that is minuscule to the philosophy damage done by those who believe that it is the purpose of government to use force and intimidation and redistribute wealth and make everything fair and equal and make people behave better and make them culturally correct and political correctness. I mean, that is the monsters that's staking us out here, rather than to say that, well, somebody is for building a wall. I'm against the building a wall, of course, but I don't go around saying, well, if you're in favor of the wall and think that you might have organized borders a little differently, I just don't put them in the same category of some of the things that our government does. But and if you have an opinion about somebody and you deal with people in categories, which you should not, all of a sudden you become the monster. So, but I think this could be easily sorted out by thinking about the non-aggression principle and by thinking what the role of government ought to be. And name calling should be very unnecessary, and people shouldn't be accused of being deplorable. They ought to look to themselves before they decide to call other people deplorable.
Yes, and let's talk about the blowback from this. Because Hillary did go after millions of people, doesn't that engender resentment and revenge for those people? And unfortunately, people run to government to use government power against the other gang. So you have two gangs using government against each other, and government just gets more and more powerful.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. That's what happens because it's acceptable to go to the government. If you feel like you have been put upon, you lost some advantage or something, you go and get yourself a lobbyist, you get a group that you can influence your congressman and get a law passed, and they always use that. But name calling, I think, represents ignorance as much as anything, and it's just demagoguery. It's just try to get a point, and unfortunately, it sort of serves that purpose. That if you do that and convince enough people, they'll paint people in groups. This is why I detest painting people in groups. I don't believe people should have any benefits as a group, and I don't think people should ever be punished as a group. And here, what Hillary's been doing is putting them in certain groups and putting the groups together and saying, well, they're all deplorable and they're evil, without dealing with some of the other groups. But it's a power struggle between the different groups. But the name calling has been going on for a long time. I remember the 60s very well, when the freedom of speech movement was going on the campuses, and they were the leftists, the hippies, and the anti-war people were involved, which was okay with me. But some of them were really ugly. It was free speech. And freedom of speech meant you could say anything, any place, as ugly as you want, even if you were on private property like a university. But you could still do it. They didn't understand that freedom of speech has a property element to it. But I remember one guy got up, I can't remember who the speaker was, but he was a well-known speaker. And he was going to speak on the campuses, and the leftists came in to disrupt his speech. And the guy got to the microphone, and he just tore in. Vulgarity, it was just horrible. And he ranted for 2 or 3 minutes, and it was to just see how vulgar you could be and get away with it. And the speaker just very calmly says to him, he says, now that you have stated your name, what is your question? And I thought that was a perfect answer, because people do a lot of shouting and yelling and name calling, and they should deal with what is the question, what is the problem? You know, if there is inequity in this country and rich get richer and the poor get poorer, what is the problem? What is the economic rules that we're defining? How does the Federal Reserve create all these inequities? So there's a different way of approaching it. Just name calling is not the answer. So I often think about the way that speaker handled this, that when people get really, really ugly, in the appropriate time, you can say, all right, now that you've told me your name, do you have a decent question for me?
Yes, Max, this runs against the voting propaganda that we're always told. I mean, we're told that we have a sacred right to vote, and that when you vote, you're making your voice heard. Some people even feel guilty if they don't vote. That's how deep it runs. Now, Hillary Clinton called all of these people who want to make their voice heard deplorable. Now, does voting only apply to approved voices? And what if Trump supporters were actually for liberty and peace? What would she have called them then?
Well, the people who believe in political correctness have an arbitrary definition of your right to speak. So if you're not using the right words, they'll destroy you. You can lose your job. You can be sued, and all these other things. So yes, that is the way it is. Now, if you're promoting liberty and peace, which a few of us on this channel do quite frequently, and they have to find a name, it's going to be more difficult because I think when you skirt on the edges and you yourself participate in some of the demagoguery that can be twisted and made to look, negative, people are anxious to, paint you in a bad way. But your question really is, how can you paint a group of people? What we believe in is liberty, and what we believe is in peace. And yet we do still get called names. For instance, they're able to figure out something. So if you believe in liberty and peace, you might be for free trade. Oh, and then you're an isolationist. You hate the world. You don't want to ever help anybody. The people are starving. The people have been under tyranny in this country. And therefore they twist it around and make you look very negative because of it. But I think that they will still use these bad words. And if you happen to believe that you have a right to your life, and you have a right to work, and an obligation to take care of yourself, and you say that you have a right to keep what you earn as an extension of your life, then you're just one of those selfish libertarians or free market people. You're not willing to sacrifice for other people. And of course, their sacrifice they're talking about is sacrificing your money, not their own, because many people who advocate this and condemn libertarianism, they themselves are, taking care of themselves and insisting that somebody else take care of the poor, and yet they will resort to name calling and trying to blame them. But they've come up with a negative. But still, I think the point here is we who believe in liberty and peace, it is up to us to do a better job, because they shouldn't be able to get away with that. Why should they be able to get away with saying, oh, you guys just believe in liberty and peace, and then what they'll do is they'll distort. And of course, they can do that if they don't have an understanding of economics, because if you're not for the welfare state, then you don't care about poor people. Well, maybe if you really cared about poor people, you would have free market economy and property rights, and you wouldn't tempt people to go on welfare. You would make sure that everybody could get a job, because in a free society, there are a lot of jobs. It's just that you can't regulate the price of that labor. But if you want freedom, if you want a big middle class, and you want prosperity and peace, you have to go with a different system. But you have to convince people that that is what we really believe in, and make those who want to call us names look like the real jerks they are. See, I can call them a name too.
Finally, Dr. Paul, let's step out of the circus tent, because surely this is not what America's founders envisioned. Let's talk about what a constitutional government would look like, what elections would look like if the non-aggression principle was deeply rooted in the minds of Americans.
Of course, I think basically our Constitution was, aimed to do exactly that. I'll talk more theoretically about a Constitution that would endorse the non-aggression principle, because I think our Constitution has been just ignored and circumvented. Just take, for instance, the Declaration of War. It was explained to me when I was in Congress that when I told people they should declare war if they want one, that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. We don't pay any attention to that anymore. So this is, something that we could visualize exactly what it would be like. But we need a government. We need to ask the question, what should the role of government be in a society like that? It should be to protect liberty. That's it. Protect liberty. That means that if somebody invades our country, you'd have a responsibility. But protecting liberty means you keep restraints on the government, because most liberty in this country is taken away from us by our government. Since 9/11, a lot of trouble is still existing in the world, and we have become more aggressive overseas. But the greatest danger to our liberties hasn't been by somebody who invaded us. The people who committed 9/11 atrocities, they didn't land and take over and cause the problem. No, our own government did it. The people did it. They begged for it. Take care of us. We want to be safe. It might happen again. Yes, but the government should be designed to protect liberty, never to undermine that liberty. And that's why the founders tried very hard, like with the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, to protect privacy and property. But it hasn't worked very well. I saw a statement the other day of a country that they said it was in it was in a mess because there was a contest going on in the country between democracy and despotism. And who was going to win out, democracy or despotism? And most people know despots don't sound too good. That might be like Hitler or somebody. We certainly don't want a despot. But many people don't realize you can have despotism, without a Hitler in charge. You can have that with bureaucrats acting like despots and enjoying it too, and people writing and reinterpreting the regulations. And they say, well, we got this authority from the Congress. The Congress passed this law and said that we can do such and such, and the IRS, of course, overreacts and all these things. But democracy can be despotism too, because then it becomes the dictatorship of the majority. So I think democracy, which the founders couldn't stand, they said we don't want a democracy because it becomes very authoritarian. All you have to do is convert 51%. In this day and age, it's not difficult. Put all your special interest groups, conservatives and liberals, put them all together, and you get 80% of the people, are for using the government to their benefit, and then they split the loot. They have agreements. You will vote for these programs, this one. Right now, they're talking about a new budget, and I understand the true conservatives, the constitutionalists in Congress, are very upset because it looks like another deal made between the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership, and the closer we get to the end of the year and the election coming up, the more likely is that the compromise will be more spending and democracy will reign. The majority will agree to it. And that is the reason in a free society, the government is very limited, very small. You don't have gigantic bureaucracies. You don't have bureaucrats carrying guns, and you don't have a standing army that's marching all around the world. You don't get into nation building. It would be strictly limited. But once again, in order to have that, the people have to ask, what should the role of government be? The founders asked that question. They did their very best. They gave us our Constitution. It hasn't worked very well. You could help rebuild on that. But I think that we're going to go through a lot more difficulties before the people wake up and decide that we need different rules. But I think we will. I think there's a fertile ground out there, and more people are looking at it. I think that eventually the people are saying, we're sick and tired of all these wars. Let's bring these troops home. We can't afford it. And I think they're going to see when the financial crisis comes that this whole effort of the welfare redistribution is nothing more than a tool of the bankers and the Federal Reserves and secret society that controls our government, the state, the silent state. So that is a brief outline, but I think the most important thing is to understand what liberty is. That means you have a right to your life, you have a right to your liberty, and you ought to have a right to keep the fruits of your labor. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And Chris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Good. And to the audience, I appreciate very much you being with us, and please come back to the Ron Paul Liberty Report soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, and RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Check them out, subscribe. Now, he kind of has a quick overview of, after the financial, collapse comes and people, will understand. And he's kind of really skimming over, I think, something that will, I believe, the path that we're on. I think there's enough evidence out there that says, yes, we're going to have a financial, whoever becomes president is going to be inheriting multiple presidents' structures that were put in place, that the path that we've been on has already been, laid, and we are reaching that, what I've called that tipping point, and we are going to see some sort of collapse, whether it be the economic collapse, some social collapse, civil unrest. There's going to be issues. That's where I think a lot of people are fearing, if this happens, with what candidate do we not have a dictatorship come out of? Or the potential, for a whole new type of system that you think that we have law enforcement problems now, you're not going to be protesting on the street against them. But will we get that far into it? I think here in America that probably wouldn't happen. I can't say for sure. But we do have the potential for a orchestrated chaos that, without there needing to be a dictatorship, they can control or eliminate people that don't go along with the system that's being laid. But there's also a chance that we get someone that says no. Where we go from here, it just seems to be left, in the air. I think it's left in the hands of the people, and not necessarily the presidency, but the framework of society will ultimately determine what's acceptable. It can also divide a country. And if you look, there's many different maps out there, but there's pretty detailed ones out there that really show the majority of the country and, where they lean, and a lot are somewhere in the middle and red, meaning Republican or conservative. And it's pretty interesting when you ask a lot of conservatives, what's the main, thing that you believe in, and you get a lot of, the Constitution and religion. It becomes one of those things, though, that they go along with things that are, would you call globalist, elitist, progressive, and not the good progressive, the progressive that they say it's for, the furtherment of society, but really it's about control. They go along with this, so then when you look at policy, it seems to look like a lot of leftist policy controls a lot of what we do, but it really isn't. It's from both sides. And people that believe in the Constitution have been misled for a long period of time. And there's, other parties that claim to like it, but then they support policies that really kind of go against it. And go against what their party supposedly stands for. Again, why I'm not a big fan of parties. I look at the individuals and what their philosophy and the history of them and how they use their philosophy in their life really reflects on the individual, and that's what I look at. The whole party thing is such a sham, kind of like what was talked about in that Ron Paul Liberty report. The whole political scene is just, like I said, a circus. And I think that a lot of people that listen to this broadcast, that wherever we go from here, I really have confidence that a lot of people that listen to this are going to be okay. They are going to weather any storms that come their way, because they know tomorrow is not promised. They understand that to be able to get through the disasters, you must take some type of steps to prepare yourself. And because of that, they're going to be better off. We have others that just la 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 la. They're not going to know what hit them. And they like that. They become very influential in disasters. They want people to be more of the unaware. A lot of these people that have been doing the social justice, they've kind of been training not to really think for themselves, to jump on a collectivist issue, not knowing too many facts and carrying out missions. And in a time of disaster, they might not have a whole bunch of skills that previous generations have. Now, this doesn't speak for everyone, but there's a large majority of it. They will need rescue. And the elites will be there to rescue them in exchange for carrying out some type of mission, maybe. So that I think that's the biggest issue that we will face. Now, you know, it seems every year that some crisis seems to put everybody on edge. And I'm not seeing a lot of that this year, which is good. And a lot of times there's legitimate issues that are brought up that, you know, if this becomes something big, it could extremely affect the course that we're on. You think it's hurting now, it can really hurt if this happens or this happens. And I'm not seeing a lot of that, except for the economy is just I have to look at this from kind of the insider point of view. And usually, right about now, you'd be filling a lot of orders so people have what they need now and a little bit to get them, you know, a couple months down the road, but they don't want a whole bunch in stock. They just don't want to have a whole bunch of stuff in stock. But right now, you'd be doing pretty good. Something that might get them through to January, February. Not seeing. And then after this period is when you start seeing a slowdown in a lot of these industries. Definitely in a lot of the factories. And that's where I kind of worry. So I want people for the next couple months to keep an eye on what the economy truly, the true economy. If you work in a factory, keep an eye out. Maybe not, you know, the big automotive companies that just tend to pump out a whole bunch of cars, but again, we just heard that Ford is moving their small car manufacturing to Mexico. Okay, if I can find this clip here, I wanted to play it. Actually, let me do something real quick. Let's make it faster. Sorry, this is taking me a little bit here. Okay, I found out what. Been having problems with audio, so I've been using another method. My settings got messed up there for a second, so I had to fix it. Here we go. Now this is from We Are Change, the U.S. economic storm that will crash the global economy. And again, I think many of us know by now that we've kind of been forced in this global economy where countries no longer have a self-reliance. And we even see it in our military involvement afterwards, where we end up feeding these countries that now, at one time, were able to produce for themselves, but now cannot. And we make them more and more dependent. So let me go ahead and get into this We Are Change clip here.
Change.org here in Las Vegas, Nevada, here at Freedom Fest, and I have the distinct pleasure to be joined by the one and only Doug Casey, the original international man who I would say spearheaded the way for other people like Jeff Berwick, Max Kaiser, Gerald Celente, and he was telling you that the U.S. economy was full of hooey before it was cool. Doug, now there has been a lot of scuttlebutt always that the U.S. economy is going to crash in some way or form. The latest scuttlebutt that I'm hearing is that September of this year or January of next year, something is definitely going to happen. What do you think? What are your predictions? What is your analysis on the state of the U.S. economy, and if it's going to be the U.S., China, or Europe? What do you think is going to happen economically?
Well, as you're well aware, when you make a prediction, you shouldn't predict both an event and a date. I think that, look, you look at this from a civilizational point of view, if you would. The U.S. has been going seriously downhill since its absolute peak after World War II. Probably it hit its peak in the 50s when something on the order of, all of the skyscrapers in the world, like 80% of all the aircraft manufacturing, 80% of all the auto manufacturing, everything was done in the U.S., 75% of the world's stock market value. And now, in terms of just average income in the U.S., this country is number 11. It's shocking. So the inevitable is now becoming the imminent. I attribute it partially to the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says that all systems wind down. It's entropy. All things become corrupt as they age. And this, of course, has happened to America, which no longer exists. Incidentally, it's now just another nation state called the United States. So, to answer your question, where are we now? We entered the storm in 2007 and went through the leading edge of this giant financial hurricane in 2008 and 2009. We've been in the eye of the storm for a few years. Now we're going out the trailing edge. And it's going to be much worse, much different, and much longer lasting than 2008 and 2009. In fact, I think we're on the cusp of a revolution. It could be much uglier than what happened in the late 60s and early 70s.
In the United States in 2007, a lot of people saw the housing market crash coming. But it was never fixed. It was only paved over with more bad debt. And many people are saying that it's going to be different markets that are going to be exposed. Do you think it's going to be the United States that gets hit first, or do you think the European market with Brexit happening, or do you think the Chinese market with all the bonds that they have as well? Which one do you think is the weakest out of all those three major markets?
Yes. Who's the best-looking horse going to the glue factory? Since 2007, all of these governments, the Americans and the Chinese and the Japanese and the Europeans and all the little countries, have all been printing trillions and trillions of new currency units. So I can't tell you whether we're going to have a catastrophic credit collapse deflation or whether it's going to turn into runaway inflation. I'm only comfortable making a prediction for chaos. But I can say this, is that right now the bond market is the super bubble, the most dangerous thing. And unfortunately, it's also the biggest market in the world. So the worst is also the biggest. This is a disaster. And real estate floats on a sea of borrowed money. Interest rates go up, the bond market crashes, it's going to kill real estate. And real estate is so liable to taxation by the government. Stock market, it's in a bubble. This is very serious. I mean, a lot of people are going to lose most of what they have. They're going to be very unhappy. So where's it going to happen? China, Japan, the U.S., Europe? All of them are in terrible shape in different ways. Can't say. Where's that black swan the size of a pteranodon going to land? He's got a lot of potential perches.
That's definitely a great way of describing it. It's a very kind of confusing system whenever people do talk about the financial system and economics, but I think anyone who looks at it knows that this problem can't be really fixed. They know that something is coming up ahead, and I'm wondering, with the elections here in the United States, do you think it will be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump who will lead to a faster economic decline?
Well, first of all, let me say this, that I don't support Trump. I won't vote for him. But I hope he wins because the choice is Hillary. And Hillary is nothing but a minion of the deep state. And she's much more warlike than Donald Trump is, regardless of the foolish rhetoric he uses. No, Trump, get used to the idea that Trump is going to win because all those people that voted for Hillary on the Democratic side, they don't care about a hostile, demented old man like Hillary, like Bernie. They just want radical change because their standard of living is dropping. And that's what Trump is symptomatic of, too. So I can't say what kind of stupidity either one of them are going to do. I mean, maybe Hillary won't even be nominated. What I'm really afraid of, quite frankly, is that Trump, who seems to have made some idiotic choices as potential vice presidential running mates, the worst of them may be this general that ran the DIA. And I think that Hillary might go for a general as the VP, too. Or if she's not nominated, if she's indicted for one of her numerous crimes, the Democrats might go for because Americans love the military, idiots that they are. So this is it's a bad scenario. I don't care how you slice it.
It's going to happen regardless, and a lot of people, they see the solution as expatriating, going away from the United States, moving away from the financial system. You traveled the world. You've seen a lot of countries in your existence, and I was wondering, which one sticks out to you most? Which one impressed you the most? Which one do you like the most?
Well, I've lived in 10 different countries. I've visited 150, most of them many times, actually. I'm currently spending a lot of time, most of my time, in Argentina and Uruguay. They're off the beaten path. They aren't involved in any of these wars and the things that. So I like it down there. I like Argentina because it's the seventh largest country in the world, but there's only 40 million people, and they're all around Buenos Aires, so it's an empty country. I like that, and the government has just changed. I mean, I put a lot of money in Argentina, and my friends thought I was an idiot for years. It's the country where money goes to die. It's very famous for that. But the government has changed, and they're acting very intelligently. They've fired 100,000 government employees. They've gotten rid of export duties, many, many things. So I think Argentina stands a chance of booming in relative terms anyway in the next few years while the rest of the world sinks into a global depression. So right now, my number one choice. But if I was 30 years younger or 40 years younger and I wanted to make money, I would go to Africa. Africa's where it's at.
Any specific region of Africa? Are we talking about Nigeria, South Africa, Northern Africa? Which areas stick out to you the most?
Certainly Africa south of the Sahara. West Africa, Central Africa. I was just in Zimbabwe, actually, about 3 weeks ago, pursuing my hobby, which is talking to the government about how they can radically reform their society. And in Zimbabwe, I met absolutely all the ministers, with the exception of Mugabe himself, who unfortunately was in Singapore at that time. But I might go back there because Zimbabwe is, as we speak, rolling into total chaos. So good time for me to visit them again. I don't know. Which one would I choose? They're all different, just like all the countries in South America are very different from each other. Flip a coin. You got to start someplace.
That's what I usually do sometimes when I don't know where to go. I literally flip a coin.
It's like Yogi Berra said, you come to a fork in the road, take it.
And a lot of times those decisions have been serendipitous and very magical. And seriously, I flip a coin sometimes and decide where I'm going to go. Zimbabwe and Argentina are going to be on the list, so stay tuned on this YouTube channel for more reports from those countries. Thanks for the great advice. You also have a book.
And, of course, I brought a copy along. This is why you go on television to promote a book. Anyway, this is my 6th or 7th book, but my first novel. It's the first novel of a sextet, reforming 6 unjustly besmirched occupations. This is Speculator, and it explains the theory of speculation and economics and the mining business, all these things and more. But really, it's about a revolution in Africa. So we've got mercenaries and child soldiers and all that kind of stuff. It's a very good read. And next year we'll have Drug Lord, where I explain the drug business as our hero advances to that. And he becomes an assassin, and then a terrorist, and then a warlord. And finally, he's a very good guy. It turns out that he's the Antichrist. So all these occupations that I've just mentioned have bad PR, which I will debunk for the audience.
We're going to have your link in the description below. We already have like a mini crowd listening to this interview. Doug, thank you so much for your time and all the great work you've been doing for a number of years.
Don't you dare follow.
We are Change. We are Change on YouTube, and we are change.org. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, I think safe havens, you could have a safe haven, but I think it's going to become something that's more very localized areas. I think any modern areas will be highly controlled. I think that if we have a world economy that collapses, for struggle of control of areas in the population, you will see extreme measures used. And as you see this, the areas that are kind of more wild will be left alone for a while, until the resources of those areas will need to be exploited. Then you see where history starts looping itself back again. Because in certain areas, countries, regions, you will have freer societies that come out of it. Than other areas, you'll have more authoritarian control. So we have, I think, a problem when it comes to too much technology, which, you know, there's other broadcasts here on UCY that cover a lot of the mad science and the technology. Jules does a great show that covers a lot of that. And, you know, almost all of it, you know, this is coming straight from research labs, you know, universities, doctors, researchers. You know, just look at what Google talks about, and then imagine what comes out of some of the other organizations and research firms that aren't as public. You know, Alphabet Inc., and then, you know, an involvement with DARPA, and Alphabet Inc. owns Google. You just see some of the mad science that comes out of it, and, you know, if you think that you have enemies out there, you think, oh yeah, that would be great. But then you got to remember, look at our political scene we're in right now, where it doesn't seem there's really any good choice. And I could be proven wrong. Trump could get in office and be some great president. That's to be seen. First, he has to get into office. We'll know his true intentions when he's in office. You know, will I see a better tomorrow? Will I see the ability for a future when we have many high schoolers that don't work? Because many of the high school positions are now filled by adults trying to survive. Will we see a freer market and the ability for more entrepreneurs to achieve their goals and less of this monopoly? Because monopolies don't represent a free market. Usually, monopolies are created not because one company is just that great. They might have their good times, and so will other companies. But usually when they're able to use government to advance their own cause, that's usually how monopolies are created. And I think you see that in our market that we have today. And of course, they'll go, well, you know, that's capitalism. When it's not, but they're doing that on purpose too. It's capitalism. One, it's justified. Two, when people rail against it, they'll rail against capitalism, not corporatism or crony capitalism, where it's helped and created through the use of government force usually, or the threat of government force. Okay, let's pull up some. Now I have this from the rightstuff.biz. And I found this article kind of interesting. Actually, I'm not going to read this. Just instead, I'm going to read this other article. And this is out of the libertarianrepublic.com. Libertarians must cut all ties with the alt-right movement. Now, I've heard the alt-right explain two ways. One way, I think, is a deliberate misconception. And the other way has been explained. And I'll get to this other article here, but I want to read this one thelibertarianrepublic.com. Libertarians must cut all ties with the alt-right movement. Politics is a game of perception and coalition building. And let's be honest, libertarians struggle with both of these concepts. For decades, the libertarian movement has allowed others to drive their narrative and often failed to make meaningful coalitions with individuals who could help pass significant policy reforms in the interest of ideological purity. Libertarians have rejected working with Republicans or Democrats and chided those who have, out of the fear of compromise that the political process necessitates. This is all fine and good. Recently, however, many within libertarian circles, including anarcho-capitalists, have become sympathetic to another movement, the alt-right. For whatever reason, the rules that normally apply to political alliances have been thrown out the window, and lovers of liberty blocked by the dozens to figures such as Milo Yiannopoulos, a person whose message is un-libertarian at its core. The alt-right is difficult to pin down. It is an amorphous group that breeds in online chat rooms where they stoke the flames of political discontent with their witty and often mean-spirited memes. Political correctness is their enemy, and the movement will stop at nothing to annihilate the social constructs imposed upon them by the left. In terms of policy, alt-rightists are often populist in tone, opposing all illegal immigration and most forms of legal migration. Minorities and women are the prime targets of their trolling, and the movement has only gotten stronger since Donald Trump became the Republican presidential nominee. Trump's policies echo their neo-reactionary worldview, while outlets such as Breitbart News feed them a steady diet of confirmation bias. Enter the libertarian sympathizers. Many individuals, myself included, will defend Yiannopoulos and others in terms of their political rights. Libertarians rightly assert that members of the alt-right should not be censored or prosecuted by governments as long as their speech does not imply a real immediate threat. However, others have taken their defense a step further. Rather than defend the base right of such provocateurs, big-time libertarian personalities have started to defend the content. Perhaps the most egregious example of the alt-right kiss-up is radio host Alex Jones, but his transformation has been so monstrous that he cannot even properly be labeled a libertarian anymore. More than libertarians for Trump or the countless other personal examples true libertarians experience on their Facebook news feeds daily, the alt-right sympathy from Thomas Woods is perhaps the most disappointing. Woods does a lot of good for the movement. While I do not agree with him on everything, his podcast, website, and books have done more to grow the movement than most others could ever hope to achieve. He is an effective advocate for the cause, and for that should be applauded. However, his show has taken a recent liking to rationalizing the actions of Yiannopoulos and his band of internet trolls. In episode 703, titled Social Justice Warriors, Who They Are and How to Deal with Them, Woods interviewed Vox Day, a religious fundamentalist whom Milo has called an alt-right figurehead. Woods and Day both slam libertarians who engage in respectability politics. and lean on the line I do not agree with, and you have to say, but I'll defend your right to say it. Wood's position should be all well and good if he did not constantly slam other libertarians for harming the brand at the 2016 Libertarian National Convention. The talk show host gave a rousing and well thought out speech on how to market libertarianism, a speech that also served as a veiled shot at nominee Gary Johnson. For Woods to attack Johnson as harmful to libertarianism, yet rush to the defense of Yiannopoulos and Day is hypocrisy writ large. Objectively speaking, while Johnson is no purist, he is certainly more libertarian than an anti-immigration extremist or self-proclaimed Christian nationalist. Association with these people harms the libertarian brand in immeasurable ways. The voters in this country up for grabs are not going to be swayed by appeals for white nationalism and the use of nasty rhetoric. Members of the alt-right should be able to speak without censorship from the state, but libertarians should avoid any association with the hateful group at all costs. Not only does the alt-right differ from libertarianism starkly on philosophy, but collaboration with those with hateful hearts is bad for the movement's optics. I think it's bad for the movement's soul, if you believe in true freedom and stuff. And people are like, well, the alt-right just means the alternative right. The alternative right. Well, that might have been what you were fed, but the alt-right has been defined by this. And I was going to read the article, but just go search it. On Breitbart, there's an article talking about what is the alt-right. And read what they say the alt-right is. And tell me if you agree with that. Because I'm not a nationalist. I'm a freedom-loving individual. I'm not a collectivist. I'm not going to jump on some racist group. And everybody has the right to free speech. It's when you actually start imposing your beliefs, whether it be harming others or forcing your beliefs on people by harming them, and when you abridge other people's freedom. And this whole being offended and political correctness is out of control, but then the response to it has gotten out of control. We've basically lost our way. Now, sorry. What is shooting? Okay. Trying to bring this up here. If I can find it. Sorry, I'm trying to get it up here as quick as possible. Just have a couple little issues, and I'll get it up here one way or another. Wow, sorry. A lot of stuff got posted over top of it. Okay. This was a quick interview that Peter Schiff had. This one was over the economy, and this is from Next News Network with Peter Schiff. And it's about the economic shifts that are happening right now. And he believes he has the advice to survive them. So we'll go to this, and I probably won't play the whole thing, but I do want to play the majority of it. No one has all the answers, and that's why it's really good to have a few different opinions on where to go. Like I always tell people, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I think that's critical. So here we go.
Joining me now is American financial analyst, stockbroker, author, CEO, and chief global strategist of Euro Pacific Capital, Peter Schiff. He joins us now to talk about the global economy, the U.S. election, the Fed's latest move to print trillions of dollars more in quantitative easing, the death of Obamacare on the horizon, and the latest geopolitical tensions. Peter, welcome back to the Next News Network.
Oh, thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Now, North Korea just fired a ballistic missile from its submarine off its east coast. According to the U.S. and South Korea, tensions are escalating between the West and China. China has ignored the international community and continues to militarize the Chinese triangle there. Vietnam now moving missiles into the region. Japan becoming more aggressive, retooling its constitution. The Philippines military bases are active again with U.S. soldiers. If war were to break out in the South China Sea, how will this affect Americans who have become absolutely dependent on cheap goods from Asia?
Well, certainly America is in no position to afford a war. I mean, we're really in no position to afford peace. That's how broke we are. But certainly anything that would require the expenditure of more resources that we don't have would simply add to our problems. The government would have to run even larger deficits to absorb those costs, which means it would have to print more money. The Fed would have to create more money to monetize those deficits because Americans don't have the savings. It's not like World War II where we can go sell bonds and the American public is going to write checks. American public is broke. They have lousy jobs or they have no job at all. They can barely survive. They can't afford to pay their own bills, let alone the government's bills. So we're very, very vulnerable to any kind of increase in government spending. But even if there is no war, we're still going to have a financial crisis worse than 2008 because of the problems that already exist, let alone how much worse they would be to the extent that we had some overseas conflict to deal with.
Now, Hillary Clinton, she's a critic of for-profit schools. She's pledging in speeches across the country to crack down on predatory schools and help students drowning in student loan debt. Bill Clinton, as you know, he earned $17.6 million from the world's largest for-profit education company, Laureate Education. Now, do you believe Hillary is she really going to help students drowning in student debt, or is this just a play for the Bernie supporters?
Well, unfortunately, politicians have been taking advantage of students for a long time. I mean, the problem is they're very young in general, and so they don't really have a lot of understanding of how the real world works because they never really had jobs. They've lived with their parents, and they're very idealistic. And they also get very apprehensive about their future. And so what's happened is politicians have driven up the cost of education because of their subsidies, because of the involvement of government. Education is very expensive. And now, because it's so expensive, young people don't know how they're going to be able to go. And then the government comes and says, oh, we have a solution. We'll arrange cheap financing. We'll let you borrow a lot of money to pay the high cost of tuition. And it's all this debt that keeps driving tuitions higher and higher. And then, of course, conveniently, the government comes out and says, oh, we'll help you with even more loans. Basically, what happens is the government cripples the students and now offers the students a crutch. And the students believe that but for the government, they'd have no crutch and they couldn't walk. But if it wasn't for the government, they wouldn't need a crutch because it's government that makes education so expensive. But more than making it expensive, it actually destroys the quality of the education. So you're not even getting any value for what you're buying. But a lot of young people have been scared into believing that if they don't go to college and get a degree, their life is ruined. And so they end up borrowing a tremendous amount of money to get a worthless degree. And now the politicians could get their votes by promising to solve a problem that they created. Hillary Clinton is not going to solve the problem. Hillary Clinton will simply make the problem worse.
Now, Hillary Clinton's emails have revealed a woman seeking solutions to a series of critical health problems, including a cracked skull, and even seeking out Parkinson's medication for extreme exhaustion. Now, the media certainly is working overtime to discount any questions of her health as simply conspiracy theory, even while respected doctors are raising some very serious concerns. Now, aside from her national security failures, which I think we can agree on, which certainly should exclude her from running altogether, given the recent revelations of her health, should the American people be concerned about her health crisis?
Well, the health is the least of my concerns. I mean, maybe if she got really sick, she couldn't do as much damage. I'm more worried about a healthy Hillary Clinton and what she can do than a sick Hillary, because the real problem is what she's going to do, what her policies are going to be. I mean, she's a very corrupt individual. I mean, she's basically running a criminal enterprise with her husband, Bill. They entered politics broke, and now they have a net worth of over $100 million. I mean, they did that by peddling their influence, and they were doing it in a way that was probably detrimental to the interest of the American public, and now they're trying to escalate that by moving Hillary into the White House. I can only imagine how much money the Clintons stand to gain if they can get back into the White House again. I mean, look how much they made just having Hillary be the Secretary of State. Imagine, what it's going to be if she's president, or what they made when she was a senator. I mean, she's going to have far more influence to peddle. I'm sure it's going to be a lot more expensive to bribe Hillary once she's president, but obviously that's going to continue. So I want to keep her out of office. I'm not, the health issue, as far as I'm concerned, is a sideshow to the main event of the fact that she is incompetent and a very dangerous woman to be president of the United States.
Donald Trump now, he's made criticizing international trade deals like NAFTA and the TPP a centerpiece of his campaign. Hillary, on the other hand, she supports those trade agreements. Will the Trump administration be able to bring back jobs and pull America from these agreements? Are these international trade deals good for America?
Well, the agreements are not the problem. I'm not saying that these are the best agreements and that they couldn't be renegotiated more favorably. I'd just like to have unilateral free trade. These agreements are managed trade because they're enormous. I mean, they're very thick. There's lots of papers there. Free trade wouldn't require that volume of paperwork. But we're not going to restore America's greatness unless we go back to what made America great in the first place. So it's not as simple as just better negotiators sitting across from the Chinese or the Mexicans. We need massive restructuring here at home, and that means huge cuts in government spending. We need to eliminate entire departments and agencies. We need to basically tear up all these regulations that have been enacted over the years. We need to make government much smaller. We actually need cuts in entitlements, something that Donald Trump is promising not to do. We're going to need that. We're going to need to reform our tax code. We're going to need lower taxes. We're going to have to focus taxing on consumption and not taxing savings and investment and production. So we need to do a lot of things. We can do those things, but so far I don't hear any of the politicians actually talking about what needs to be done, and nor do I know that any of them have the stomach for swallowing the bitter-tasting medicine that we need to swallow if we're ever going to have a healthy economy again.
Aetna now, they've announced that they're going to be ditching Obamacare. Do you think Obamacare is going to split in half to remain on life support?
Well, Obamacare was a very predictable disaster. I mean, all the problems that are going wrong with Obamacare were things that I forecast, that I wrote about and spoke about years ago when they first enacted this. And the fact that everything is happening precisely the way I said, just further supports the underlying thesis. This is a disaster, and it's just going to eventually lead to the collapse, I think, of our healthcare system, and the government is going to then take advantage of the damage that it caused to probably nationalize the entire thing and go to some type of single-payer socialized medicine. And maybe that was the plan all along, to poison the well and then take advantage of what happened. But, it's not just the government's healthcare plan that it's a disaster. Everything the government does is a disaster. I think what the Federal Reserve has done is going to be a bigger disaster. Everybody believes that the quantitative easing and cheap money was a success. It's as much a success as Obamacare. In fact, it's probably even a bigger failure, and it's going to cost us even more when the consequences become more widely known and appreciated.
Now, you just mentioned the Federal Reserve. They admit they need another $4 trillion in quantitative easing to offset an economic shock. Those are their words. Will this simply be a Houdini act to offset an economic shock and just kick the can down the road? What's going to happen to the House of Cards?
Well, they're talking about what they might do in the next economic downturn, which I believe has already begun. I think we're already in a recession. It's just that nobody wants to acknowledge that fact, certainly with an election coming up where Hillary is promising 4 more years of Obama. They don't want to admit that we're already back in recession, because who would want 4 more years of recession? But I don't think that there's any amount of quantitative easing that's going to get us out of this. I don't care if they go $4 trillion or $40 trillion. It's not going to work. It can't work. It's like trying to drink yourself sober. That doesn't happen. The more you drink, the drunker you get. What we need is detox. We need to go cold turkey. But unfortunately, the problems have built up so large over so many years that that's going to be a very painful trip to rehab. But that's why none of the politicians or the bankers want to accept reality, because they don't want to acknowledge how big a mistake they've made and how much trouble we're now in because of what they've done.
And I want to pause it right there for a second and explain that this is kind of what I'm talking about, where we are so far down the path that we are going to have to suffer consequences from letting it get this bad. What are those going to look like? Most people are pointing at the economy. Ron Paul has for years been talking about the monetary policy, the Fed, all of this. So, this all plays a part in it. Back to this clip.
Taking a look at the Brexit, how was a weaker UK pound bolstering the country's industrial export orders to a record not seen since 2014?
Well, look, a weak pound is not going to help the UK. I mean, it just makes their imports more expensive, and it means they get less for their exports. And certainly, you're going to export more when your exports go on sale. But, the goal is not to have to mark down your exports. You want to get, top dollar for them so that you don't have to work as hard to pay for your imports. So the weakening pound is not going to help the UK. What would help the UK is getting out of the EU, because then maybe they won't have as many regulations and they'll have a freer market, and then they can have a stronger economy and eventually have a stronger British pound.
Now, Deutsche Bank, they're shutting down hundreds of branches in Germany, causing great concern. And, of course, the Russian desk now apparently helped to move $10 billion offshore through something called a mirror trading scheme. First of all, what is a mirror trading scheme? And then what do you believe is the ripple effect of the Deutsche Bank collapse?
Well, I really don't know. And I don't know what the effect is going to be. I mean, Deutsche Bank, hasn't completely collapsed. The stock has certainly gone down We're actually below the 2008 financial crisis lows. And I think there's problems not only in those European banks, and Deutsche Bank is not the only one that's had a substantial decline. There are a lot of banks that have seen similar drops. I think there's a lot of problems with our banks, and I think we just haven't been dealing with it yet. And I don't think this is something that's isolated to European banks, but who knows where the dominoes are going to end up, and what the collateral damage is going to be. But obviously, what's going on is certainly a sign that there are big problems here, and it's particularly, I think, the backlash with respect to the quantitative easing programs and the negative interest rate programs that are going on in Europe, and how this is affecting the banking industry.
Italy now could prove to be actually the next nation to leave the Brussels bloc. That's according to Mr. Stiglitz. He's a former chief economist of the World Bank, also a Clinton insider. Now, he says an amicable divorce must be considered to avoid a political cataclysmic event like the Brexit. Why must a divorce be considered to avoid economic doom there in the Eurozone?
Well, I don't know, ultimately. And, a lot of scapegoating is going on. You have a lot of problems now in Europe, and it's easy to blame it on the European Union. But look, Italy had a lot of problems before they joined the EU. I mean, the countries that really should be complaining should be Germany. I mean, Germany was in much better shape and would be in much better shape had they not created this ridiculous union. And, I criticized it from the very beginning because I understood exactly the moral hazards that were being unleashed, and all the things that I was writing about and talking about in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when I wrote about what was going to happen as a result of this plan. Again, just like Obamacare, all this stuff is happening for the reasons that I said it would happen. So, but just leaving, if a country wants to just get out of the EU, but just preserve their own independent, anti-competitive, big government, social welfare state policies, getting out is not going to be a panacea. The problem is the government and the deficits and the regulations that everybody has now based on their membership of the EU. I mean, the EU was supposed to rein all that in. It was supposed to keep a check on government, but it hasn't done that. Because of the moral hazards, all these countries who are sharing the euro currency and are in this union have been able to run constant deficits. And it's actually been enabling local politicians to promise even more free stuff to the voters than they might have been able to promise if they didn't have the backstop of the European Central Bank.
Now, post-Brexit, we're seeing federalism rise in the Eurozone in an attempt to keep the states in line with policies and regulations. There's now discussion of a standing EU army. We've reported here how Germany is actually beginning to absorb some of the militaries in Europe. Meanwhile, of course, populist movements are pushing back. What do you believe is going to be the ultimate fate of the Eurozone and, of course, the standing army of Europe?
Well, I do think eventually that it will change dramatically. And I do think that more nations will leave. And I think ultimately there will be fewer countries that share the common currency. But I don't believe it's going to go away. I think the euro will be there. I just won't have as many nations a part of it. That's probably the way it's going to ultimately go down. But, it's not just the European Union that's in trouble. I think the United States, we're a union of 50 states, and I think our union is even more trouble than the European Union. Not necessarily that it's going to break apart, like the Civil War days where states are going to try to secede from the Union. I don't know that it's going to come to that, but I'm certainly most states would be better off economically if they could do that. But the U.S. government militarily probably won't allow that. But I do think that our union is going to see some major problems with respect to the economy, the value of the dollar, our standard of living. So, while a lot of people want to speculate as to what's going to happen with the European Union, it's the American Union that I think is much more troubling and certainly much more of much greater interest to most of the people that I deal with.
Shifting gears into Pittsburgh now, they're going to be hosting Uber's driverless pilot program. If self-driving cars are eventually perfected, how do you believe this is going to affect taxis, bus drivers, truckers, etc., in that specific marketplace?
Well, it will clearly put a lot of truck drivers and cab drivers out of work. Right now, I think the most common job for men in America is truck driver. That more men are employed as truck drivers than in any other occupation. And if we have, autonomous trucks, those truck drivers will be unemployed. Now, that is a good development. I mean, I think the world will be much better off with autonomous cars. I mean, just think about it from your own perspective. If you didn't have to drive, if your car just drove itself, I mean, that means you could sit in your car, you could do work, you could watch a movie, or you could be productive. It wouldn't be dead time. Think of all the people that commute back and forth to work. They could be working during that commute, so people could be a lot more productive. I mean, think about traffic, and what about all the accidents? I mean, more people die in traffic accidents than probably from any other cause. Obviously, if we have autonomous vehicles, we will cut down dramatically on fatalities. We certainly won't have to worry about drunk driving. People will be able to go out, drink whatever they want, and just get right back into their car. So this is going to be a big positive. I mean, think about trucks, too. Trucks will be able to drive on the road 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You won't have drivers that have to go to rest stops and then sleep. And then it's very complicated, too, when you're a truck driver, to keep track of how many hours you're allowed to drive and when you have to rest. So trucks will be much more efficient when they can operate 24/7. A lot of families, they won't have to have two cars. A husband and wife can have one car because the car can drop one person off and come back and pick another person up, drop another person off. Your car could be working for you. You won't have to operate it. So I think it is going to be great for human beings. It's going to be great for our collective standard of living to no longer have the drudgery of having to drive. So let our automobiles and trucks drive on their own without having to be operated by a human being. So it's a good thing overall, but certainly people are going to have to deal with the reality that if you're a truck driver or a cab driver, you're going to have to do something else, just like people that manufactured buggy whips had to do something else when the automobile.
And I'm going to pause it there again, because if you think about it, it also puts a dependence on technology that even the best of it glitches out, just as humans do. But humans can make choices where who's to blame when something just, that there's a whole bunch of these out on the road, but this one just happened to glitch out and we can't figure out why. Well, this glitches out, sends a fuel tanker off the road, or, has lithium batteries and it's a battery operated truck and it glitches out and blows up, or, what happens then? Who do you go after? You at least, if a truck driver did not get enough sleep and drove off the road, there's someone there to blame. You're going to have a lot more of this no blame. You can't go after anyone. No one's going to be able to be held responsible, and I think that's one of the big fears in a lot of this technology. But back to this clip.
Came along. It wasn't that it was a bad idea to have automobiles. It was a positive development, but for the buggy whip manufacturers, obviously it was a problem. So people are going to have to deal with this. But what's a big problem in the United States is because of all the taxes and all the regulations that we have, the U.S. government is going to make it more difficult for unemployed taxi drivers or truck drivers to get better jobs and to get other jobs. And that's why we need to dismantle the government, because we have to prepare for this, technological improvements. We have to make it easier for people who are displaced to find other work. But the government is going to interfere with that. But the problem is not technology or advancement. The problem is government.
Now, this election has been quite a wild ride so far. Of course, the DNC email hacks creating so much havoc for the Democrats. Trump's meteoric destruction of the Republican neocons. We're seeing an exodus of all of the Bushite individuals there. What are your thoughts on the election this year. Are you going to be casting a vote for Hillary?
Well, look, the biggest problem with the election is somebody's going to win, right? That's always the problem. And I think that between the two, I think Hillary is going to do more damage than Trump. Now, I don't necessarily believe that a lot of the things Trump is stumping about on the campaign trail, I don't actually believe that a lot of these things are going to happen. But I think Donald Trump probably has a better chance of doing the right thing as president than Hillary Clinton, where I think she has no chance of doing the right thing. I think Donald Trump can be reasoned with, and I think he might surround himself by much better people than will Hillary Clinton. And I think he has a good understanding in general about how bad the problem is and how government is at the root cause of it. Not all of the prescriptions that he's advocating are the right ones, but he's on the right track. And so I would much rather see him as president than Hillary Clinton. Of course, there is a third choice. There's, Gary Johnson running as a libertarian. And of course, that's a long shot, but who knows? I mean, if enough people vote for Johnson, then maybe they throw the election into the House of Representatives, and he could end up being the compromise candidate. Now, Gary Johnson isn't perfect either. I've got things that I disagree with on Gary Johnson. But if you look at everything in totality, Gary Johnson would be the candidate with whom I disagree the least. So I guess I would say Gary Johnson would be my number one pick, and then Donald Trump, and then Hillary Clinton is last. And so I would write somebody in before I vote for her.
What is your outlook for the rest of 2016 and, of course, looking ahead to 2017? Final thoughts and solutions for the American people?
Well, I think the economy continues to deteriorate until it eventually deteriorates faster, right? That's the direction we're going in. I don't believe we've ever really recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. I think all we did is blow a bigger bubble, but we never had a real economic recovery that raised the standard of living of the.
I just wanted to add to that. I'd probably put Jill Stein before Hillary Clinton in that lineup. But I still see none of them.
American people. In fact, the average American is worse off today than he was when the recovery started. And we've never had a recession that was worse. I mean, we never had a recovery that was worse than the recession that we're recovering from. And I tell people all along, if you thought this recovery was bad, wait till you get a load of the next recession, because this was the weakest recovery in the history of recoveries. And I think this next recession could be the worst recession ever. It'll certainly be worse than the Great Recession that we had in 08 and 09. And in fact, it may even be bigger than the Great Depression that we had in the 1930s. And so we're going to have to rename that.
All right, Peter, always a pleasure to have you on the Next News Network. Do you have any projects you're working on you want to plug real quick? Any books?
Well, no new books right now, but I think people should still read my most recent book, The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. I revised it a couple of years ago, and it's as relevant now as when I first wrote it. And again, I'm always on the internet. People should check me out on my YouTube channel, The Schiff Report, at schiffradio.com, to listen to my podcasts and my video blogs. And don't forget, the most important thing you can do is to save yourself financially right now. We can't really do anything at the ballot box because we're going to be outvoted, by a bunch of people who depend on government most likely. But you can do something about your own personal finances. Contact me at my brokerage firm at Euro Pacific Capital at Europac.com is our website, and get yourself some physical gold and silver. We've got the best prices at my gold company. SchiffGold.com is the website for my gold company.
All right. Those are the words of Peter Schiff, the American financial analyst, stockbroker, author.
That was Next News Network, Gary Franchi with Peter Schiff. And I was able to play it all and just kind of popped in there. Now, when we look at who could we put into office that potentially could stop an economic collapse, I really don't believe you can. I think that's one of the major issues that people can't get through their head. Who could stop this economic? No one. What they can do is open the market up to give people the opportunity to create for themselves and stop the economic collapse. When people take it upon themselves to not have someone tell you, well, the economy's bad, you shouldn't do this. A lot of people forget that there were actual legit jobs created during the Great Depression. Not enough. Little too late. And what even hurt the Great Depression, it wasn't a Great Depression at the beginning. A lot of people don't understand it was after the New Deal that the U.S. actually went fully into a depression. And because of the New Deal, if you look at history, is what drug it along for so long. But that's not taught in a history class. We have the liberal agenda that wants to teach how the New Deal saved the country. But it didn't. And if you don't believe me, do the research. Look into it. Look at dates along with the stories that came after the dates. Government intervention always creates or prolongs issues. And they always seem to have an answer on how to fix it. As we see after president, Congress people, men and women, different races, different cultures, very few of them are willing to speak up with knowledge of the true reason we're in a lot of the mess that we're in. And it is a lot to do with government. And it's not saying that government creates racism, but it definitely helped prolong it, sustain it, only with the answers to solve it. Which didn't stop racism. We still have racism. Now, maybe you don't have government-ran racism anymore. Government-supported racism. At least out in the open like previous. But a lot of people forget culture was also moving towards that. And then it was a feeling of a threat to another culture, what created violence, and actually stirred more racism. Because now, government's solution is to enforce a rule that, well, you don't like them, too bad. Serve them. Now it's moved into religion. Now the whole your right to your labor, your right to your property has moved to religion. Oh, you say your religion says that you shouldn't participate in something that goes against your religion. You can't talk bad about it, or you shouldn't talk bad about it, but you also can't participate. No, you have to. If you want the privilege to work, then you must serve people that go against your religion for the privilege to work. Your labor, if you choose to use your labor, you must use it for what we tell you to use it for. This has been going on, but it's been incremental. Most people have been kind of oblivious to it. And people think, I might be also beating up on people that might vote for a candidate because they feel that it's the only choice to prevent another candidate from getting into position. And then, people go, you don't support Gary Johnson, so you probably think people voting third parties. No, I applaud people that are willing to look at a third party candidate. And if you believe in them, then that's who you should vote for. And Penn Jillette, someone that, I have quite a bit of respect for. Not always agree with them, but have respect for, because he tends to be that free thinker. Here out of the Libertarian Republic, Penn Jillette, to those saying third party is a wasted vote, F you. Penn Jillette has made a career out of being both offensive to some and poignant to many. He is well known as one half of the famous magician duo Penn and Teller. The two regularly perform in Las Vegas and have been the stars of several TV shows. When not creating magic, Penn often discusses his atheism and libertarianism. He has endorsed libertarian Gary Johnson and has grown tired of being told that he is wasting his vote. Accordingly, Jillette articulated that he has only 2 words for those engaging in such a fallacy, F-U, as elaborated upon by Jay Wilson of the Libertarian Future. Penn is correct to be upset. While voting for a third party takes commitment to principles, voting Republican or Democrat typically does not require a similar backbone. Such votes often only prolong the existence of a government system which has constantly failed and has not delivered what it has promised. Gillette famously got into a similar discussion 4 years ago when he appeared on Hannity. Hannity insisted that Penn ought to vote for Mitt Romney in order to defeat Barack Obama, and that vote for Johnson was a half a vote for Obama. However, Gillette did not waver, asserting that he did not believe in voting for the lesser of two evils, and that he would vote for Johnson because he saw more similarities than differences between Romney and Obama. Hannity also stated his problem with the libertarianism is that humans have a proclivity toward evil, and that they therefore need government to engage in some policing of morality. Penn's defense of individual liberty, even in the voting booth, is very laudable. While most celebrities lean left, Gillette has never been shy about expressing his feelings, and best of all, he is extremely informed on very nuanced issues while a magician would not typically be considered to be the best possible spokesperson for a political ideology, Penn has proven to be unbelievable in spreading the ideas of liberty in an unconventional but highly effective manner. The substance of Penn's claim in voting for a third party has become more relevant as Gary Johnson has climbed the polls in this election cycle, even as Johnson has neared 15% of the popular vote. Republicans and Democrats alike have suggested that a vote for him or Green Party nominee Jill Stein could lead to election of either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Central to the belief that a vote for a third party is a wasted vote is a necessary belief that either party is somehow entitled to the votes of those even moderately close to its ideology. This has become no clearer than with a candidate like Trump, who is significantly more liberal than traditional Republican candidates. Voters are expected to turn out and vote for him as if he were their ideal choice. Similarly, many of the Democrat Party are much more progressive than Clinton, evidenced by the popularity of Bernie Sanders, but are told to vote for her all the time. Hopefully, Penn Jillette's central feeling of voting for a third party resonates throughout this cycle, and voters soon lose the stigma associated with casting a ballot for a candidate other than a Republican or Democrat. Earning a place in the debates would be a massive step towards demolishing this narrative and allowing people to seriously consider a third candidate, should Johnson be able to do so. The unpopularity of the other two major candidates could lead to him having a very serious impact on the final results of this year's presidential election. Until then, as Penn says, do not allow anyone to call your vote wasted. And like I said, if you believe in him, you should vote for him. Just because he's third party, I don't believe you're wasting your vote. I think you're wasting your vote when you throw your principles out the window and vote for the lesser of two evils. I think that is exactly what has led us to the point we're at right now. Okay, give me a second here. We are coming to the end of the broadcast here. Okay. One more here. I'm not going to be able to cover it all. We are coming up to the end of the broadcast here, but out of the Libertarian Republic also, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld's message to Republicans: we were the most physically conservative in office. And of course, it probably won't load for me quick enough. Out here on me. But you can check that out at the libertarianrepublic.com. It didn't want to load for me. And Gary Johnson responds to presidential debate exclusion. I'm not surprised, was his comment. And that was an article out of libertyviral.com. Go check them out. And they also had an article saying that Hillary wants to basically enlist Al Gore to convince millennials not to vote third party. Because remember, he's part of the Green Movement. So they don't want Jill Stein to get any votes because they want to try to get all those people on board with Hillary so she can beat Trump. I think it's going to be hard, definitely, with her, as I described, completely falling out. It looked like that she lost her one shoe because she was literally being, like, drugged into that van. Like, her feet were dragging up the side of the steps there. She wasn't able to lift them or anything. I think that really stopped her. Hence why she might be going as far to think that Al Gore is going to save this election for her or have any sway with the millennials. Okay. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up after this. Don't forget to also support UCY. If you shop Amazon, go to UCY.TV. Scroll down towards the bottom. You'll see the Amazon button. If you shop Amazon through UCY.TV, you get the same great prices, same great shipping rate, and at the same time, you're helping alternative media out like UCY.TV. And, you know, it's platforms like this that give you such a wide range of ideas, opinions, and information that you will not get from mainstream media. These are things that, you know, they don't want to hurt their advertisers. So you're not going to hear it. Where here we rely on your support, and that's one easy way to continue to, you know, shop the way you already shop, but at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs. And at the same time, you know, I'm always talking about prepping. My Patriot Supply, great prepping gear, and also water filtration, non-GMO seeds. Great selection. Go to antityrannynews.com/mypatriot and check out My Patriot Supply. And at the same time, great prices, same great prices and shipping rates. And at the same time, we get a little kickback here at antityrannynews.com to help cover operating costs on our end. And, you know, it's one of those things that I tell people, never put all your eggs in one basket. It's really vital that when you're preparing, it might be an earthquake. Well, prepare for more than just an earthquake. Prepare for economic disaster, you know, earthquake, natural disasters, or just, you know, a social breakdown in your locality. Make preparations where you have a little bit on hand to try to avert, you know, the worst circumstances in those circumstances. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV.
You can catch every Monday night